state systems, and we created democratic rule of law societies with the separation of powers and the rule of law rather than the rule of power. I mean, these ideas were a consequence of realizing that the human being, and not only bad guys, but the human being is not capable of managing power without oversight. We have learned that in the French Revolution. We have learned it, ever since. So in all the dictatorships of history, and if that, what I'd like to put out there is, let's remember this lesson, and let's build, let's not think that the problems we're facing today, or the war crimes and the persecutions and everything, that this is a question of bad political leaders as individuals. It's a bad political system. And then whoever you put in the position of leading such a system, will it end up being corrupted by it, almost inevitably. So it's not about replacing bad people with good people. It's replacing a bad system with a good system, a system that does not tolerate abuse of power, a system that does not even allow you to get to that point. And that's a system that, ensures transparency. I use with my students, I use the example, I always say, if you come to my lectures by car, well, now they don't, obviously, it's all online, but if you come to university by car and you just have this huge parking lot, and there is a sign and it says, £2 or dollars or euros per hour parking fees, and we have an electronic verification system. Every 30 seconds, it verifies whether you've paid your fee. People will leave my lectures to go and pay for those fees. But if it says there's a sign, we trust you, we won't check on you, but please pay those $2. I ask a room full of 500 students who will pay, who will leave my lecture to go and pay for the fee. No one will. And I'm putting this out there, intentionally to say it's not because they're bad people, it's just because there is no oversight. So why should they do something inconvenient if they don't need to? And I think that's also important. We have this in our human nature, this kind of conveniency, comfort, a little bit of laziness. And why am I not using dramatic terms here and saying, this is evil people and these are the most serious crimes and so on? Maybe I should say with Hannah Arendt, that there's a banality of evil. If you have 1,000 officials just taking the path of the least resistance, in the end you have Julian Assange and Snowden and everybody being persecuted. Because nobody stands up to their superiors. Nobody stands up for what is right because it is uncomfortable, you see? And because they can get away with it because there is no oversight. And because the alarm system that we have in society, the media doesn't assume that function anymore. And I think, so I'm sorry if I'm very systemic here, but I think it's very important because the biggest challenge of the 21st century really is shaping a global governance system that can actually, without moral outrage, just look at the human being and say, this is who we are, all of us. And so if this is our input and we're, a bunch of emotionally governed, most of us fairly unconscious, self-interested beings, if that's what we bring to the table, and what we want to produce is a peaceful, sustainable, and humane society, a just society, then something has to change. You have to have a governance system that can take this input and produce that output. And so if you have a system that allows unchecked power and enormous accumulation of wealth, and exceedingly complicated taxing systems so that nobody understands but those that don't pay taxes, and we allow for secrecy and we prosecute people who tell the truth, well, we're not going to survive more than 100 years from now, because we won't be able to address the global challenges. And so I just want to put this in perspective, and that really, I reported that to the UN General Assembly. I did a whole report about this psychosocial factors that are conducive to torture now in my mandate, but I think it is conducive to all of the bad things happening in the world. And I proposed also a little bit of a roadmap of how we could design perhaps a global governance systems that could address this, could deal with human nature without pretending that we're something else than we are, but reining it in and transforming our governance system into something that could be constructive. And I think here it relates to this, what we're talking about today, that we do need transparency, we do need independent oversight, we do need a fourth estate that does actually, deserve that name, because it controls the exercise of governmental power, be it the judiciary, the legislative power, or the executive power. Because by and large, in the last 50 years, we have been doing so much, in the West at least, so much privatization. If you have a parliamentary system that allows for lobbying, obviously those parliamentarians, whose election campaigns have been financed by private companies and their staff is being paid for by private companies, they're not going to legislate in the interest of the people. They're going to legislate in the interest of the companies. It's normal, because we have a bad system. You can't have lobbying in Parliament and think that Parliament will actually legislate in the interest of the people. It's a no-brainer, but it's willful blindness. We're ignoring it because it's inconvenient, right? And the same parliamentarians then elect the government or the president or whatever system you have. And obviously then you have a privatized parliament with a privatized government making laws for a judiciary that can only apply those laws. Essentially, indirectly, it's all privatized. And then the media, the fourth estate that has to oversee this, corporate media, is privatized. So why are we surprised that nobody is actually acting and governing in the interest of the public? But we're still democracies, so we still have the power. If we only wake up and put down this willful blindness. It's willful. It's not imposed on us. It's willful, because the information is here. The people that are watching us, they're not blind. They're, and all of us, we have, at least, in my experience, it was a painful awakening to what's actually going on. But once you know that, you can actually start assuming political responsibility and take those decisions that are necessary to be taken. And I think that's really where we have to start if we want to change something. Because campaigning for individual people is very important to illustrate what's wrong with the system. But if we don't adapt the system, we will never be able to make those promises of the UN Charter of a peaceful and just society, or of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, make that a reality. And I'll close my introduction on this, that whistleblowers and the press are absolutely essential. To me, and I've said that before, they are the alarm signal of society. They're the immune system of society. If they say something painful, it's like you have a painful inflammation. You don't like it, but you better appreciate it, because it is an important signal that something is wrong here, and that you shouldn't take painkillers. Putting them in prison, persecuting these people, is taking a painkiller. You should actually look at where the pain comes from and address the source. And that's the societal function that whistleblowers and the press have and should have, and we should protect it, and we should be grateful for it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Niels. And our final speaker is someone who's made a real effort to join us today, despite having difficulties joining. So I'm very grateful that he's here, and really, I admire a lot of the work he's done and the way in which he engages with others. Juan Pasarelli. Juan, if you could unmute yourself, please. And if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and then perhaps speak for about 10 to 12 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be short. Thank you very much, Deepa. The organization of this event is magnificent. We needed something like that, especially starting this year, highlighting these massive issues that people tend to forget about because they're not in the front lines of every newspaper as they should be. I feel honored to be here, even though it was a bit accidental, with Niels Melzer and Fidel Narvaez, who's a long-time friend of mine. We've spent days and days, I don't know how many hours we've spent in that bloody embassy together. I'm a journalist and filmmaker. I've documented the WikiLeaks case for for over 11 years now. I think I'm the filmmaker that has had most access to the WikiLeaks crew and Julian Assange over that period. And I started out thinking, wow, this is a great story about, look at that, this new technical innovation that they made. And 11 years later, I find myself still with my jaw dropping about, with these crazy situations that we're finding ourselves in, where a publisher who exposed war crimes is being prosecuted for exposing those war crimes, and the war criminals are being lauded and applauded by their own governments and other government officials and whatnot. Before I start, Nancy went away, but I just wanted to say to Nancy, thank you so much for your work. It is amazing what you do for Chelsea, for Mohamedou, and
Thank you.
this is incredibly important. We need more people like you, and obviously more people like Nikki and the incredible Niels Melzer. I wanted to say a few words about that come from Julian, although I'm not going to say it with the same eloquence as Julian has. And I'm just going to blame it on English being my second language, although I think I'm just not eloquent as eloquent as Julian. He once made a recording with me for an event, talking about the media and the purpose of media. But he started talking about communication. And without communication, we don't have anything. We don't have civilization, because if we can't communicate with each other, we can't learn from each other. Then we're literally just in singular cellular beings that cannot coordinate and learn. So he placed a lot of importance, and I think I do as well, in the value of communicating. And nations like the United States having the First Amendment, and the Congress shall not legislate on anything that avoids press freedom, and the freedom of the press or the freedom of speech in the United Kingdom. These are values that we should highlight, and they should be our guide in the future. In the media, when I was in journalism school, the media they taught me that we're the people that holds power to account. We hold corporations and governments to account, and when they do something wrong, we bring it to light. And that's the function I grew up admiring, and why I actually do what I do still, and probably the reason why I was so drawn to WikiLeaks. But what happens is, as these media organizations grow, they become powerful themselves, and they mingle around with the same people, and they're invited at the table of power of these individuals that have the control, and they become this power that they're supposed to be policing. And we end up in a situation for, it's been going on for decades now, but in the last 10 years, there has been a real descent of journalism into absolute something that for me is abhorrent. For me is seeing the media giants, the mainstream media, becoming literally just a propaganda apparatuses for certain powerful or political groups, and we end up with an oligarchy of private media that controls the narrative, and tells us what we think, what they think we should be believing, not what the governments and other political factions are doing. To give you a very good example of this, The Guardian, who's been applauded for great pieces of journalism, there was a report recently on Declassified UK. After the Snowden revelations, the government had enough of The Guardian being too cavalier and being able to report on secret documents, and they were invited to sit at the Notice Committee. And they also were given access to, for example, the first ever interview to an MI5 head, and other intelligence access to in MI6, etc. Now the Guardian regularly reports on interviews and direct access from these intelligence agencies, as well as GCHQ. And they stopped completely any type of reporting that is critical of the foreign policy of the United Kingdom. The same has happened, especially recently, during and after the elections. The New York Times and media like MSNBC publishing unverified sources, unverified source information, as if it were already something true, and they, as long as it fits the narrative, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, if it's verifiable or not. This is a practice so simple that they teach it to you on the first day of journalism. If you have a source that tells you something, you have to verify the information before you release it. But you see it as a common practice on these big news outlets, where they don't verify the information and they set it as the narrative, as long as that narrative is good to whatever political faction they are supporting. If Julian used to say that if the media did the work that they were supposed to do, the internet would have changed nothing. And he was referring to specifically of the phenomenon that happened during 2010, when the internet got politicized, and suddenly technology like WikiLeaks was developed, and groups like Anonymous and Occupy and the Arab Spring were all using the internet to democratize our nations. That has changed over the last 10 years, and the Silicon Valley and governments have managed to take a hold of our communications and our ability to communicate freely and understand our world, and censor us. This was very, very apparent in the 2020 elections, in post 2020 elections, when Silicon Valley decided to, in a coordinated blow, censor the United States of the the president of the most powerful nation on the planet, from Twitter, from Facebook, from Google. He disappeared. This was, to me, absolutely astonishing. Their reason for that was that he had violated their terms of service. Incitement of violence was the excuse, but really it was the terms of service. And now we live in a world where we are having to communicate on private platforms, which, if they don't like what you say, they are going to censor you. In fact, this very event is being shadow banned, which is a practice commonly used, so that people don't see this event on the Courage Foundation, in fact, 96% of the viewership of the Courage Foundation in the last month has dropped. This cannot be explained by anything else but censorship from these Silicon Valley oligarchs. All this power concentrated in these oligarchies that control information is really something that we have to fight against, so that we can go back to doing to holding these powers to account. We need to find new models and applaud these models like WikiLeaks that actually hold back these big corporate powers that are in bed with government powers. And I think that's all I should say, because there are more important people here to talk than myself.
Juan, you said you were not very eloquent, and I think that was a bit of a misstatement, willful blindness, whatever you want to call it. But thank you very much for that contribution. I just wanted to firstly thank our speakers for their phenomenal work, which we're very grateful for, and invite questions. Could I ask our moderators and hosts to please unmute everyone, and then remove the locking, and if people would either indicate in the chat if you would like us to ask the question for you, or if you could unmute yourself and just queue up, and then we can call you out, if that's okay, because I'm afraid I think my computer's been on for about 18 hours and everything is seizing up, and I don't want to take the risk that I don't see or hear you.
Everyone is unblocked now.
Perfect. Thank you, Moritz. Moritz, would you be able to direct the questions? Because I think my computer is again seizing up.
Okay, I can try. Up to now. Fred Tonheim. Hallo, Herr Tonheim. Haben Sie eine Frage?
Can I just hear anything? I think, oh yeah, there he is. Fred, please go ahead.
Everybody's speechless. Maybe I have a question for Niels Melzer. What's the way forward from now, you think?
It's a stony path, obviously, but I honestly, I think it's encouraging to listen to everybody on the panel here, and obviously, there's literally hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, doing excellent work around the world, and I think we're getting there. Historically, sometimes you have to take a lot of distance to see progress. Sometimes you have, because it's not a linear process. What we can see it's not a linear process. It's one step, or two steps ahead, and then one step back. And right now we're doing a huge step back. But by and large, if you compare where we were 5,000 years ago, we're doing pretty well. Now that's not to say that everything's okay, but I think we're going in the right direction, painfully, and slowly, barefoot on a stony path. But it's worth doing it. When I see, just the people on this panel, it's just, with all of you, I've crossed paths in some form, and it's been very encouraging and inspiring, and we've learned a lot. I just want to a short remark on these freedom of information requests that were so important also to my investigation of the case of Julian Assange. I don't think I could ever have come to a reliable conclusions without those requests, without, even though, you know, some of those pages that were handed out by the authorities, I mean, it's ridiculous to believe that this is still has anything to do with freedom of information. If you get, you know, 2,000 pages from the Swedish government and they're just black, you know, I think we could have saved those trees, you know, and just acknowledge that there is no freedom of information. You know, it may be okay to blacken a private email or phone number or some names, but there's virtually never a justification to just cover an entire page. And I just want to say this because I know many, you know, journalists and others and human rights defenders are listening. Don't tolerate that. When you get that pages like those back, this is not freedom of information. This is censorship, and you have the proof. They sent you a censored page. I think we have to be very, very demanding in those requests, not just to get the paper, you know, but to get the information, because it's not freedom of paper, it's freedom of information. And so if they send you a paper without any information on it, that's not freedom of information. But I don't want to monopolize here, but I think this is very important. All of this to say, the way forward, this was your question. Each and every one of us has a place and has a voice and needs to use it, not, you know, to vote, obviously, but also to complain when they don't get the information they want, because that's so important. To complain to the media when they're not reporting on important things, to complain to the authorities if they're not giving the information you have asked for, and to, you know, make your voice heard.
Thank you. We actually had that this morning. We were talking about letters to the editor and letters to parliamentarians and whoever comes to mind, really.
Could I just say, Niels, you're right, of course. However, the problem is there in getting our voice heard outside our own echo chamber, because there's so much censorship in one form or another, and we haven't really had much help from our own institutions, our own people, our trade unions, etc. You know, even institutions that are supposedly on our side issue, you know, brief statements, a couple of platitudes, and then they're gone. Including, for example, you know, in the UK, there are millions of people that supposedly vote progressive style of parties like the Labour Party or the Workers' Party now. Where are those people? Most of them are nowhere to be seen, either on social media or on the ground. So I think that one of the problems is our incapacity, not because we haven't tried, we've killed ourselves, our incapacity to really mobilize and to get people organized, to get somewhere, to get to a place where they're not going to be beaten up. See, yes, I think that there is some willful blindness, but I think people are terrorized. I don't think that they want to be willfully blind. I think they are basically terrorized that one way or another, their fate will be exactly the same as the person, the whistleblower or journalist who's being tortured. And so I think we need to find more ingenious ways of really expanding our voice and getting beyond that small space we've been given, even if that small space is only on the internet. So we have to be more innovative, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's an experience I made. I mean, I have a very visible function for the UN, and I thought that if I use my official channels to report to governments and to the General Assembly in New York and the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and I make, you know, press statements about what's going on, for example, in this Julian Assange case, which is really scandalous. I mean, it's absolutely scandalous what's being done to this man, and what's being done to the press and to the public through him, you know, through his abuse. I thought that this would be sufficient, but it's not. It's also a little bit of a bubble, you see, and so that's why I decided to to write a book about this, and it came out in German. I'll just show it to you. It just came out recently. It will be also translated into other languages. And I wanted to tell that story not in the form of technical reports. I've done those, you know, and I've appealed to states to fulfill their obligations, but they're not doing it, and they usually get away with it. And so I decided not to let go. And so now, you know, with this book, I can reach a much broader public. And obviously, Juan has made a film about it, and you know, others are making films that will be coming out. And I think that's important to tell it as a story. You know, it's not just a technical, legal, or whatever issue. It's a human story. It's the story of Julian Assange as a person who's being persecuted. But it's also the story of all those people who suffered those crimes that he exposed and that have never received justice. I mean, how can we even believe a government, you know, when they don't prosecute their own war criminals? And how are we surprised that George Floyd gets strangled, you know, by police officers in bright daylight in front of running cameras? And, you know, you look those officers in the face and you feel like, you know, they don't even realize they're doing something wrong. Well, you know, for the last couple of decades, this country has not prosecuted its war criminals. They have tolerated, you know, criminals in uniform. And I'm not, you know, most soldiers are not criminals, but they have tolerated those that have committed those crimes. So they think that's normal. And I think, you know, we have to tell the public, you cannot tolerate this, that your soldiers are committing war crimes far away, and then believe it's not going to come back to haunt you at home. And it's not just an American story, it's everywhere, you know, and I think the US just happens to be particularly influential and powerful. But it's so important that we raise our voice, that people that have official functions, such as myself, but also others, that we use those functions to actually inform the public, and that we take certain risks. You know, we shouldn't attach to those functions, but we should to our integrity and try to be an example for the humans. It's so important.
Is it all right if I ask a question? This is Ann Baptista, and I'm wondering. It seems to me that the U.S. Through its various agencies has had a decade to launch a smear campaign against Julian Assange. And they've strategized that, and unfortunately they've been very effective in mobilizing the media and practically every institution within this country to essentially vilify the Darnella Frazier in this case, who exposed the collateral murder video. And so my question is, given that they spent a decade strategizing, spending lots of money to do this, can we as a community, the various, I mean, there's so many different groups who have worked to defend Julian. Can we do this as a community in concert and really strategize? How can we bring people to the choir? Right here, we're speaking largely to the choir. And I put some comments in the chat. Niels participated, Ray McGovern participated in an event at a Unitarian Forum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they changed people's minds in 60 minutes. In 60 minutes. But what we need is credible institutions that people come to because they expect credibility. And then we have credible speakers who say things that they're otherwise not going to be exposed to. And it seems like that might be a way to change the tenor. Also, Niels, I'm going to beg you, please translate your book into English right away. Please do not wait. Do not wait.
I'm on it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll stop. Thank you very much.
I'm just to say it's being translated. I'm actually I'm translating it myself just to be sure that it's really it is as it should be, you know. But so because there's just plenty of details that I don't want to take the risk that it might be translated the wrong way in so many languages. You know, there's Swedish, there's English, there's obviously Spanish, which I'm not very proficient in, but yeah.
How is Chelsea? How is Mohamedou? How are your other clients who are still in Guantanamo?
Thank you. I was just writing in the chat. I heard from Chelsea recently. She's looks good and seems to be doing well. Mohamedou is doing well. I think he's going to be on here at some point. I wanted to say and follow up with Niels. You know, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. We tell stories. That's what lawyers do. We can't change the facts like they might do in film, or at least we're not supposed to. But it's all about stories. That's how people learn and remember. It's all stories. I tell students to listen to country music. There's a whole story, beginning, middle, end in 3 minutes, and you know what happened. And that's what people, what appeals to people. Mohamedou's book, Guantanamo Diary, has been translated into 27 languages. And the movie is in the process, the Mauritanian, of being translated. And I'm hearing from people all over the world. Mohamedou and I and the actors and Kevin, we're all talking to a lot of people, and people saying, I had no idea that the United States government could hold someone for 14 years and not charge them with a crime. How could that be? And yet there's still 40 men there, 25 of whom have never been charged with a crime, and 6 of whom have been cleared for release, 1 for 10 years. How can that be? It's because there's no conversation about it. And so we're bringing that out and forcing the government to look at it. The same thing with the cases we won for Ibrahim al-Nasri, who's facing the death penalty in Guantanamo, and the European Court of Human Rights wrote 2 beautiful opinions about him, and his family received 200,000 euros. So people around the world know that the United States is violating the Treaty Against Torture, knows who the torturers are, knows who the war criminals are, and does nothing. But we have to look forward here as to what we can do, instead of always, we have a tendency to always be complaining about it. Let's look forward, as Neil said, and let's all do whatever it is we can to bring change, particularly lawyers who are incredibly powerful when it comes to bringing change. Let's just do it. Thanks. Thanks for the question.
And perhaps I just want to say, if you allow me to pick up again on this question of telling stories. I said before, it's the story, you know, about Julian Assange, it's the story about the victims of the crimes that were exposed. But it's also, in the book I wrote, I'm telling my own story, you know, how I basically, because I have been poisoned with this narrative. And I think that's so important, that we can show people that it can happen to you. You don't have to deny it. You know, it's normal that you're being deceived. And in fact, I don't even know on how many other cases I'm being deceived. You know, just because I saw through the, you know, or behind the curtain, if you allow me to avoid bad words. In one case, you know, it does not mean that, how many things are there we don't know? No, and because the media is not reporting on it, and because the whistleblowers that want to report on it are afraid to do it because they're being persecuted. And so it's so important that we know that. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Donald Jordan, and I teach in university, and I find the most effective way for students to learn is through stories and attributing them to my personal experience. So I completely agree with you concerning that. But I have a question for Nancy. By the way, I saw the movie. I was really quite moved by it, and but I was wondering, with your dealings with the U.S. government, were there a lot of challenges in getting documentation from the U.S. government in any of your clients?
Well, certainly in Mohamedou, again, we got involved in that case in 2005, and really nothing was happening because the people were allowed to file, the prisoners were allowed to file petitions for writs of habeas corpus, but they weren't going anywhere. And we filed FOIAs, and it was essential because Mohamedou had told us about the torture, and we were being told by the government that he was just exaggerating, and yet there it was in his medical records, broken ribs, for example, and other examples. So FOIA is, I mean, I file FOIAs in every criminal case because you get different information. There's still information we don't have. In my other Guantanamo case, there's a lot of information that we don't have, that we can't pursue, that we can't talk about. It's a constant struggle. In my own case, I filed a FOIA years ago, 1976, I think, and it took a few years, and we keep getting the same piece of paper back with more, less markings, redactions, and you just have to fight it. But yes, it's a constant struggle. I tried the Holy Land case. It was the largest Muslim charity in America, and there was enormous amount of information we couldn't receive. So it's a constant struggle for me in every case. But let me just say again, the stories are what matter. Make everyone a real person. That's why Mohamedou's film is so powerful, because it's about him, a real person. Thank you.
Yes, I do have a follow-up question concerning Guantanamo. Guantanamo is a U.S. military bases, and just as other military bases, it is considered land of the United States. Also, the military not only follows the military code of justice and laws, but they must follow the Constitution. Why? Because of that, Guantanamo to me seems to be like a jurisdiction issue. Has there been an appeal concerning the jurisdiction of Guantanamo, so it can make?
Yes, the answer is yes. When the Supreme Court ruled in the Boumediene case in 2008, it said that it basically is American land. It's leased from Cuba, and that the prisoners there could file writs of habeas corpus, which they could only do, and the government had to respond. That could only be true if this is an American jurisdiction. And as for the military, I want to say that we have military members in our defense team in Ibrahim al-Nasri's case, and they are terrific defense lawyers. They are impassioned, they're serious, they mean it. They're going to fight the government on behalf of their client, and they've been among the best. And if you saw the movie, you saw that Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Couch, a Marine, who was requested that he prosecute Mohamedou, and he refused to do it on the basis of the Constitution. And as a Marine, he had to follow, as a Marine and a person, he had to follow the Constitution and the Convention Against Torture. There were other prosecutors over the years, 4 or 5, I believe, who just said no, military people. And that's very hard for someone who's a Marine to do. And he did it and stood up. But, they go along with it just like other people go along with it. But yes, jurisdiction has not been an issue for many years in Guantanamo.
And what is the process now to try to close it, to try to get rid of all the prisoners there or relocate them?
Well, it's really up to President Biden. Obama failed, and his Justice Department appealed every habeas case that was won. Mohamedou's case was remanded back to the district court. Many of them were just reversed. So all the ones that won, all he had to do was say, don't appeal, and those people would be out. It was disappointing. Finally, he did provide something called the Periodic Review Board, and a lot of people got out. There are now 40 people left. But it's up to Biden. If there's the political will and the political capital, it can close. 24 senators have written an impassioned letter to the president saying we have to close it and explaining how it can be done. The people, the 6 who've been cleared for release need to be released to their homes or wherever they're safe. The other 22, I believe it is, who've never been charged. And this is 12, 13, 14 years, 15 years, some of them have been there. That's over. They need to be released to some place where they will be safe and where the U.S. supports their release in whatever way that is necessary. As to the about 7, including my client, who have been charged, their cases need to be resolved within the rule of law and with due process, not in the military commissions, which, by the way, do not abide by the Constitution. Hearsay is admissible. There is no right to confrontation. There's no speedy trial. The issue of due process is even questionable at this point, but it can be done. They've just got to move on it, and they've got to move on it quickly. And we've got to keep putting pressure on them, which a lot of people are doing. And thank you to those 24 senators who sent a direct letter. Mohamedou sent 2 letters to the president also, and other detainees sent letters to the president. So that's where it stands at this point.
Nancy, could I ask, has anyone in the US tried to challenge the Espionage Act as being unconstitutional?
Over and over again, and over again, which is not to say we shouldn't continue. The Supreme Court says it's not a violation of free speech. There is no whistleblowing exemption, essentially for people who are exposing things that shouldn't be classified or are not national security. We litigated this, we litigated it in Chelsea's case, others have litigated it, and we have to keep litigating it, basically. It was a bad act to begin with in 1917, and it's an even worse act now. Obama prosecuted more people under the Espionage Act than had happened before in its entire history.
Niels, what happens to you after your mandate finishes?
If I survive that, yeah, no. I don't know. I guess my UN career is certainly finished because there is no, there's no secret that if you want an influential position at the UN, you need the approval of the P5, and I certainly have 2 of them being pretty angry at me. So I'm not expecting, a UN career. But to be honest, I think. I've never planned my life. I've always discovered it. And the advantage of this is that you're not limited by your own imagination. So I'm quite confident that, that there's plenty of very interesting and passionate surprises waiting here. As long as you follow your passion, nothing can really happen to you. If you attach to functions and career models, then you at some point you have to compromise with your integrity. But if you lose your integrity for a function, you lose everything. But if you lose a function because you attach to your integrity, you haven't lost anything. And the next function you get will be one where you can basically maintain your integrity. And that's really what I also always tell my students: discover your life, attach, hold on for your life to your integrity, because it's very easy to lose.
So there is a world where we'll see Fidel Narváez, President of Ecuador, Niels Melzer, Prime Minister, President of Switzerland.
I wouldn't even attach to functions like this. I honestly I don't know, but I'm very open for everything. And for right now, I have so much to do for the remaining 1.5 years of my mandate that I don't even have time to think about that.
Well, it's good to have you at least for 1.5 years, and I'm sure that we'll be hearing a lot about you anyways.
Thank you, and of everybody else, obviously. That's very important, because without the input, and I'm just talking now about this case of Julian Assange, where I have been deceived, without the invaluable input and support of more people than I could possibly even count in an hour, I would not have been able to bring all those things together. And I know that's the same for all of us. When we do this work, I'm sure it's, when you represent clients as well, Nancy, it's the same thing, right? I mean, you need so much support of your environment and of many motivated people, on the stage and behind the scenes. So again, I think I'd like just to reiterate also what Nancy said, everybody, and what I said before, everybody should act on their spot. And I just remember what I usually say, everybody is important, everybody, and I usually use this image of, if you're in a dark room, one person lighting one candle will make everybody see. It just takes a little flame, a little bit of light, and everybody has that light in themselves, that where they are at the moment, with what the means that they have at disposal. If they light their little light, everybody around them can choose to see. You cannot make them choose, but you can offer it to them. And I think that's so powerful. Have that image in you, and light. Don't look for the light somewhere else. Just be it, basically. Make it yourself.
Just wanted to firstly thank our panelists. You have been remarkable in the contributions you've made. We're very grateful that you're here and inspired, and I hope that being with the festival and the various sessions that people have attended has also added some joy to your life, despite us all working in very different places towards various goals on social justice. We're all together, at least in terms of our commitment to this. So thank you once again. And if people would like to stay in this room, the room's available for another 10 to 12 minutes. But if you'd like to, you can also go, as you probably are aware, we're having this quite virtual world that is by the campfire. You can click on that link and try and explore and visit Guantanamo and so many other quite unique things. I've never seen those things before, but please join us by the campfire, or please use the lobby, and hopefully we'll see you again. I wanted to say that this festival is not just a once in an event that took place and tomorrow we forget about it. Hopefully, coming out of this festival, we will have a Center for Global Justice, Peace and Accountability. A number of people who've been on the various panels today are going to contribute to it, and the aim is to bring forth more interdisciplinary work across different, journalists working with lawyers, working with activists, working with whistleblowers to help solve some of the world's problems. And we hope if you are interested in it, you can, I'll put an email in the chat and you can contact us, and if you're interested to contribute. So thank you very much to all the panelists. Good night.